Hello YouTube followers and welcome back. I realized that last week I only posted 3 videos about series finales, and that's because I had a lot of homework. I apologize, and from now on I will make no promises to post every day. In fact, I'll probably only post about 3 to 4 videos a week because posting every day is a lot of work and I just don't have time. Last week's trend was disappointing series finales. This week's trend is men in television. And that may sound obscure, or not obscure, but rather broad. And that's because it is. There's not really a theme to what I will be talking about with these men. It's more just men in television. So, my first video, I was just watching some Friends because watching Friends is always a fantastic way to spend your free time. And it got me thinking about the most hated character on Friends, and that includes all of the guest stars and main actors and reoccurring characters. Let's talk about Ross Geller. That's right. This is my unapologetic defense of Ross Geller. Oh yes. For those of you who follow me on Facebook, you may have seen that, I don't know, a couple months ago, I posted something about Ross Geller and how I didn't understand why he was such a hated character. And that's still true, because I feel like people focus on so much of the bad of Ross, they forget about all the good. And for the most part, to me, the good outweighs the bad. Now, before I begin with my unapologetic defense, I would like to tell you that I do not by any means think that Ross is a flawless, perfect character, dream man. I will say that I had a crush on Ross when I first started watching Friends because I remembered all the good he'd done. Now, Ross is a jealous person and controlling, and this stems from the fact that his first wife cheated on him with another woman, and frankly, I can't really blame him for those qualities. If my spouse cheated on me, and not only cheated on me, but cheated on me with someone of the same sex, I might be a little mistrusting myself and wonder if they ever really loved me, which I get it. So, I address the bad qualities of Ross. As human beings, we all have bad qualities. All of the characters on Friends have bad qualities because they're supposed to be human people that are easy to relate to. So I don't think that the bad qualities of Ross make him a bad person like so many other people on the internet seem to think. So without further ado, this is my unapologetic defense of Ross Geller. And I'm gonna start from season 1, which basically this video is just gonna be me going through a list of all of the wonderful things that Ross has done through the 10-year run of Friends. And in season 1, the very first season, Ross found out that his ex-lesbian wife was pregnant with his child. And he by no means had any reason to want to stay involved with this relationship since his ex-wife had moved on with another woman, and they were essentially not even going to include his name in the naming of the child, even though he contributed more to that child than her new wife. New girlfriend. They aren't married yet. That comes up in season 2 and we'll get to that. They were going to name it after the two women, even though I understand why, but still. Ross contributed more to the conception of this child than Susan did, and yet he was not even going to be involved in the naming process. That's pretty rotten of them, and yet he still decided to be a part of his child's life because he realized that the opportunity to raise a child was more important than his disdain for this position that he was in. And that's the very first season. That's the second episode of the season. And I think that's pretty great, considering how they were treating him. And so, let's skip all the way to season 2, and the very first thing that I think is important, and I'm sure there are people that will talk about the list from season 2, and yeah, that's rotten. That list is awful, but here's the thing. In season 2, Ross does the most selfless thing that any of the characters on Friends have ever done. Carol and Susan are getting married. His ex-wife and her new girlfriend are getting married, and Ross is not okay with this from the very beginning. He's not happy about it, and for understandable reasons, but Carol's parents refuse to walk her down the aisle because she is a lesbian and they don't approve of this. And Ross convinces her to go through with it anyway. Despite his feelings for their relationship and despite his disdain for the situation, he convinces his ex-wife to marry her new girlfriend and walks her down the aisle. This is the most selfless thing anyone on this show has ever done, because this does not make Ross happy. He gets nothing out of this situation. He simply does it because he knows it's the right thing to do. And that's pretty wonderful when you think about it. And really think about it, because I can't imagine being that selfless. I mean, it's horrible to say, but would you really walk your ex down the aisle to marry her new love if her parents didn't approve? I mean, I might. It depends on how the relationship ended, but their relationship didn't end very well, and he still did that anyway. And so we move on to the prom video episode, which is one of my favorite things to talk about, because Rachel is Ross's great love. We all know this. If we've watched Friends, we all know this. Now, the prom video is not a current plot point. It is a past event that has occurred, that is on videotape that we are currently watching. And the prom video is basically Ross was going to take Rachel to prom when her date seemed like he was going to stand her up. Now, this isn't selfless. This is Ross being in love with Rachel and wanting to be closer to her, but Rachel's date stood her up, and she was going to have to go to prom alone. If Ross hadn't volunteered, she might have got stood up. Now, granted, her date eventually showed up, and she went to prom with him, but Ross didn't know this was going to happen. Rachel certainly didn't, and Ross was going to go to prom with Rachel rather than her be humiliated because she'd been stood up. Incidentally, this is what brings Ross and Rachel together in the end, and that's also really kind of wonderful. She realized that that grand gesture outweighed all of the crap that she perceived as bad behavior. Incidentally, what this video is about. And she's right. because that's very sweet. Okay, so let's jump ahead to season 3. Now, this is a Christmas episode that we're talking about, because I feel that this is also very sweet and needs to be talked about. And it's not an episode that gets aired all the time because it's a Christmas episode, so it gets forgotten about. But there is an episode where Ross is walking up the stairs and doesn't realize that there's a Girl Scout behind him, and he knocks her down the stairs. And so he decides to help her sell Girl Scout cookies because she wants to go to space camp, and he was the one who broke her leg, so that's pretty sweet. That's pretty nice of him, because he doesn't have to. He doesn't know this kid, but her home life's not that great, and she wants to go to space camp, so he sells cookies for her. And he doesn't sell enough cookies to get her to go to space camp, because you have to sell the most, and he didn't. But when he fails to sell the most cookies, Chandler and Joey set up this, like, fake space camp in their apartment, and it's one of the cutest things I've ever seen, because they turn off all the lights, and they got these fake planets hanging everywhere, and they put her in the Bark Lounger, and they're spinning her around. And it's a very sweet moment. And I really appreciate that about it, because it's an underrated episode, and it's not talked about all that often. Now, we're gonna skip ahead to after Ross and Rachel break up, because I know that is a source of contention on the internet, and I'm not gonna get into whether or not I'm on Ross's side or Rachel's side, because I know whatever I say, I will be wrong. So here's what I will say. There is an episode, I think it's right after they break up, and Rachel decides to take everybody on a trip to her ski cabin, everybody except for Ross, because they had just broken up. Now, they run out of gas and end up locking the keys in the car, so they have to call someone for help, and they call Ross. Now, they need gas, so Ross has to go take them some gas, and despite having just broken up with Rachel and everything still being so fresh, he does. He goes to their rescue, and he takes them some gas so they can go on their trip to their ski cabin. And while there is some fighting and some pretty petty behavior, he does still end up getting them their gas so they can go to the ski cabin without him, which is also pretty selfless on his part, because he doesn't really benefit from this. He didn't really benefit from this either. As we mentioned in the Carol and Susan wedding in season 2, there was no benefit for Ross in this. It's pretty selfless, and he was just trying to be a good guy. Okay, so season 4, we need to talk about Emily. Again, a source of contention on the internet, but I'm talking about when Ross and Emily first meet, and this is because Rachel gets opera tickets from her boss to take his niece to the opera, but she also agrees to go to a club opening for a guy that she likes. And she can't be in both places at once, and she tries to ask Joey and Chandler, but they're both busy with other things, so she has to ask Ross. Now, Ross could be petty and not agree to take her to the opera for Rachel, but he realizes that in being petty, he's also being a bad friend, and he wants to be able to move on with Rachel as friends. So he agrees to take Emily to the opera out of the kindness of his heart, not to get back in with Rachel or get good with her, but because he wants to be a friend to Rachel. Even though he's still in love with her, and we need to get to that too, because Rachel's obviously still in love with him, and this is a whole thing. It's probably for another episode. So let's continue talking about my unapologetic defense. Okay, season 5, which, as I think about it, doesn't really have any great, well, Ross is trying to save his marriage after having said Rachel's name at the altar, and because of this, it causes some complications throughout the season, which involve him having to choose between Emily and Rachel, and realizing that things won't work out with Emily because Rachel is a more important part of his life, which is difficult to admit, but is also probably the right thing for him to have done. Now, if we get to season 6, oh good lord, I can't remember when he taught Phoebe how to ride a bike, or bought Phoebe a bike and tried to teach her how to ride it, but she ended up keeping the training wheels anyway. I don't remember, but it was season 6 or 7 when Phoebe was telling the story about how she'd never had a bike, but she always wanted one with the wicker basket and the, like, tassel handles, and so Ross went out and bought her this bike and was going to teach her how to ride it. But, you know, she didn't learn how to ride it. She just kept the training wheels on all the time, and he realized that if she was okay with this, he probably should be too, which is probably the better decision than just trying to convince Phoebe that she needed to learn how to ride a bike, because you wouldn't convince her of that, and that's alright. And since I can't remember what season that was in, we will go to season 8, where Rachel finds out she's pregnant with Ross's baby. Again, Ross gets in this situation a lot, apparently, but, he decides to be a part of this child's life as well. Now, granted, this would have been harder for him to not be a part of this child's life, since Rachel is his friend and he'd be seeing her all the time. But still, when this happens, Ross is a stand-up guy. I mean, he freaks out a little bit first because apparently no one reads the condom boxes and realizes that they're only 96% effective. But despite all of this, Ross is there for Rachel, because Rachel's really scared, and that's understandable, but he's there for her, and he does everything that he can to be a good guy and a stand-up guy, and he's trying to help her find an apartment and trying to help her get to all her doctor's appointments, but in the end realizes that it's just easier to have her live with him. But they both realize this, and we end up in that place. And so he does try to be the best guy that he can possibly be, and I think that this doesn't get talked about very often, because this happens to Ross twice throughout the series, and twice Ross decides to be there for the child even though he has no obligation to do so. And some of you may think that that's not a big deal, like, of course the dad should be there, but not every guy would make that decision. In fact, there are some men who would run and get freaked out that they're having a baby even though they're not married to this person. But Ross truly loved the two women that ended up pregnant in this series, even if it's unclear. I'm sure Carol loved him at some point, but she didn't love him the way that he loved her, and Rachel and him had agreed to be friends. Obviously, that did not last forever, but they did. Now, let's get to season 9, because season 9 is an interesting turn of events with Joey and Rachel wanting to date. Now, this doesn't really happen. Well, okay, wait. The timeline's a little foggy. Friends has a lot of seasons, and it's been a while. I think maybe Joey and Rachel don't get together till the very beginning of season 1. Well, they get together at the end of season 9, but Ross doesn't find out till the beginning of season 10. Now, at first Ross is of course not alright with his best friend being in love with his ex-girlfriend, and actually in season 8, I forgot to mention this, in season 8, Joey admits that he has feelings for Rachel, and despite Ross not really being okay with this, he does convince him to tell her how he feels, just see what would happen, and that's pretty great, because it would be hard for you to have your best friend be in love with your ex-girlfriend and still be like, no, you know what, you should go and tell her how you feel. My feelings shouldn't be as important as yours, and that's awesome. Now in season 10, he finds out that Joey and Rachel have started dating, and although he's not really okay with this, he does have a conversation with Joey later in the episode, telling Joey about how if Rachel wasn't going to be with Ross would have wanted her to be with a guy like Joey, a good guy. And that's pretty incredible. And pretty understanding, considering that they were hiding this from him and weren't really sure if they were going to tell him right away, which they should have, because again, your best friend being in love with your ex-girlfriend, that's just an area. I actually don't mind the Joey and Rachel relationship, because it does give you a chance to see the sweeter side of Joey, the more romantic relationship side, which is great, but it's Ross and Rachel. We all know this because we all watched the end of the series. Unless you didn't, in which case I've spoiled a lot of things for you and I apologize. Now, there's actually a lot of things in season 10 that you don't think about until you do. Now, one of the episodes, Rachel's father has a heart attack, and Ross goes with her to visit him, and keep in mind, at this point, they are not back together, because that doesn't happen until the series finale. Now, Rachel is heartbroken, and, I'm doing this a lot, I'm sorry. Rachel's heartbroken that her father's had a heart attack. Who wouldn't be, unless, you know, you hate your father, in which case, whatever. But her father's just had a heart attack, she's not in the best place, and she tries to, make a move on Ross, and Ross, to his best, does not allow this to happen because she's so emotionally distraught. He even brings it up in this episode that he should get a medal for that, because, my god, most men wouldn't. They'd be like, oh yeah, sure, why not? Who cares how you're feeling on the inside? I mean, I say most men, because in the universe of Friends, most men would. This is not a general thing, but in the universe of Friends, we will say that most men would do this. Joe even says that he has the ability to find emotionally distraught women. Like, in the universe of Friends, Ross should get a medal for that. And then later on in the series, Rachel gets a job offer to go to Paris, and at first Ross tries to get her to stay, and then because he doesn't want her to leave because he's still in love with her and he wants Emma and Rachel as close to him as possible, but at the end of the episode, he tells Rachel to go because she really wants to. And that is also really selfless now. And the series finale kind of contradicts that, but whatever. It's a show. Okay, so the series finale is quite possibly the romantic gesture of all romantic gestures. It's such a romantic comedy cliche running through the airport to get to the girl to tell her that you're in love with her before she leaves you forever. And people have said that Ross should have gone to Paris with Rachel instead of having her stay with him. But here's the thing. Ross also has a job and priorities, and he couldn't just leave Ben. You know, his other kid that we have to be concerned about. And also, if Rachel really wanted to go to Paris, she would have. But Ross ran through the airport, 2 airports, to get to Rachel to tell her that he was in love with her and that he wanted her to stay because he wanted them to be together. Now, Rachel is a person with a brain, so let's not get mad at Ross for making her stay, because he didn't make her do anything. She's an adult. She made the decision to stay because she wanted to, because she is in love with Ross, and also probably because she didn't want to leave all of her friends and family, which is the only thing that she has ever known. So, there you have it. My unapologetic defense of Ross Geller. Yes, there are bad qualities to Ross. There are bad qualities to all people. But I think that the good that he has done, and he's always been a good friend, despite being a pretty controlling boyfriend. But again, trust issues from his first marriage. I get it. And I think that the good outweighs the bad. And there you have it. Good night. I will see you later this week with a video on a different male TV character, and this one is probably not going to be an unapologetic defense.